There's no way I'm going to talk to you about the history of the International Church of Christ without talking about where we are from. Because the lack of history or knowledge of history for many of us has not really encouraged us to know exactly who we are and to appreciate how far we have come and why we are where we are at this time. And that's why I'm going to be borrowing from a very renowned historian, Professor Pierce of the Oklahoma University. He is one guy that knows the history of the world. He studied it out, and listening to him any day, anytime is very inspiring. So I thought about it, and I said to myself, I'm going to give you the history from Jerusalem to Bifele. Jerusalem to Jobifele. Yet today, you don't know where Jobifele is. Jobifele is our church office in Lagos. And of course, home to the Ikeja Ketu Owe ministry. And many other weddings that happen in the church. So from Jerusalem to Jobifele, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you do not fall. And that is what history is about. You know, the great historian Herodotus, you know, in one of his books, even Homer declared that the Bible is the most thorough history book in the world that says it as it is. Many historians would like to pick and choose, especially when the point does not favor them. You know, so today we're not just talking about history, we're going to be learning from history. Professor Pierce, in his history notes, writes, the wisdom of history is defined as the ability to use lessons of history to make decisions in the present and to plan for the future. The wisdom in learning about history is the ability to learn or to use the lessons of history to make decisions in the present and plan for the future. There are 4 questions today I would like for all of us to ponder upon. And we're going to go back to these questions again by the time we are done. Question number 1. Is there meaning to history? Is there any meaning whatsoever to history? Number 2. Do we learn from history? I know we normally say that, oh, we learn from history, but do we really learn from history? You know, in one of his lectures, Professor Pierce says, the first lesson of history is that we never learn from history. Because if we do, the world will be a better place. Number 3, and the consequences of our failure to learn from history. What are the consequences if we don't learn from history? And finally, what will the wisdom of history teach all of us, later generation, people to come, about human behavior, God, the church, and our place even in history? Because if we do not take all these things to heart, we are going to go on just going around the circle all over again. I'm going to attempt to give you 1,000, maybe 900 years of history in 20 minutes. Of course, the history of the church began in Jerusalem. And from that time in Jerusalem, Jesus Christ told the apostles how the church was going to spread. In the book of Acts chapter 1, he told them, first in Jerusalem, later in Judea, and in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And in the pages of the book of Acts, we see God's church moving very, very fast. It was fast, it was furious. People died. They gave up their lives so that we can have what we have today. And I believe that there is no one who can learn about history without acknowledging people that have gone ahead of us. During that time was like the golden era of the early church. The church multiplied rapidly. The church took advantage of the Pax Romana, of all the things that the Roman Empire had put down, the interlocking paved stone, the security that you can have around the Mediterranean and even beyond. A common language. Greek was spoken thanks to Alexander the Great, who Hellenized the whole Greek world at that time. So there was a common language. There was free movement. There was courier services. You could send a letter from Rome and to arrive in Judea. There was so many things they had at that time. Common currency. And that enabled the church to thrive at that point. But of course, shortly after the first 100 years, the church began to experience lots of challenges. In fact, challenges began even before the first 100 years. If you read the book of Jude, the book of 1 Peter, 2 Peter, all those times, every single letter written to the churches in the Bible were correctives, telling them this is not how to do it. The biggest threat that the church faced at that time was not from without, but from within. It was no more hail Caesar and you are killed. The most dangerous threat was the threat that the church faced from within. Gradually, without even people knowing it, many heresies began to find its way into the early church. People began to deny the deity of Jesus Christ. People began to say that Jesus Christ was just an apparition. Gnosticism began at that time. All kinds of doctrine began to come in, and it was seeping in gradually. Because we all came from the world, and coming from the world, we bring all sorts of worldly things, whether good or bad, into God's church. And that's one of those things that we have to learn, that the first commandment of becoming a disciple is to deny self, not to be yourself. Yes. So many disciples stopped denying self and they began to be their own self. Paul writes to the church in Corinth, he said, in your former life, you were led astray by mute idols, and that is what they were doing even in the church. By 90 AD, the apostles have written most of the New Testament, and of course, John the apostle wrote the last book, Revelation, and he died in the island of Patmos. But between 130 or between, let's say, 120, earlier a little bit, and 460, the church saw a new dynamism. From being persecuted, the church actually became the persecutor. How did that happen? Of course, the emperors were there. The most influential emperor in the Christian church at that time was Emperor Constantine. He declared himself a Christian, and of course declared the whole Roman Empire Christian. Now, from being persecuted, you are now all fired up. We are now the one that have all the power. And people began to become disciples for wrong reasons, to get jobs, to get recognition, to belong. But of course, each time that happens, true disciples always feel that something was wrong. And when true disciples withdrew from participating in some of the cultures and some of the new things that they were bringing, they were termed heretic. And of course, that led to the Council of Nicaea. And in that very first council, they had to determine what should we all believe in. It's called orthodoxy. So what is right to believe in and what is not right. And of course, the church at that point, they now talk about orthodoxy, and in history we hear about the Orthodox Church. And things began to go really bad. The church was separated from the state initially, but with the coming of Emperor Nero, he succeeded in marrying the church and state. So making himself the head of the church and also the head of the Roman Empire. Many years in his life, he found out that something was wrong. Even the religion he tried to create, something was wrong. And he withdrew to a new place to start all over again. He captured the city, named it after himself, and he died there. That city is called Constantinople. Until today, we have the Orthodox Church in Constantinople. And history continues to roll. With the coming of the emperors into the church, the emperors eventually removed their ring, and of course their vestments, and now took on a new vestment. And that's where the doctrine of papacy began. That he who rules Rome rules the whole church. And of course, Rome was the world power at that time, and Rome has spread throughout the whole world. And wherever Rome went, Rome would deposit its religion. And of course, that is the birth of the Roman Catholic Church. Many things went wrong. The church had finally ran into full apostasy. The Roman Church controlled everything. Controlled what you say, how you think, what you think, how you eat, what you eat, whether to marry, who to marry, and who not to marry. And by that time, it plunged the whole world into some of the most intense times in history, popularly known as the Dark Ages. In the Dark Ages, people were discouraged from practicing science. Science was seen as witchcraft. People were impaled in the name of the Lord. People were impaled for practicing science, literature for reading, and many people closed their eyes towards learning. And of course, at that time, the Roman Empire was controlling every single aspect of people's lives. There are some noteworthy doctrines or ideas that sprang up at that time, or shortly before that period. The doctrine of infant baptism, the early movement of the charismatic renewal, the table of communion now becoming the altar of Jesus Christ. In other words, in the Catholic Church today, Jesus Christ is sacrificed every single day as often as possible. I know, I don't want to make a joke of that. When people are getting married, they say they're going to the altar. I say, do you know what they do at the altar? They kill things at the altar. So at that point, the great persecution broke out. People who held onto the original truths in the Bible were considered evil. They were considered backwards, and the only way to help them was not to convert them to what they thought was real Christianity, but was to kill them. People became very afraid to share their faith, and of course, he who controls Rome controls every single thing. The worship of Mary. In the Catholic Church, you hear things like the assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That means that Mary's body did not see decay. They thought that Mary's body was taking body and soul to heaven, and she became Queen of Heaven. You find things like sales of indulgence. In other words, if you are coming to Warri and you have a tendency to debauch or to get drunk, whatever, you buy the indulgence ahead. So you buy a certificate that will allow you, even if you sin for like 1 week, 5 days, your sins will be forgiven. If you are rich, you can buy for 1 month. If you are super rich, you can buy for 1 year. So each time you hear people say, oh, please indulge me, let me claim indulgence, remember that was what they're talking about. That was allow me to do what I want to do at this time. Of course, there was Inquisition, and at that time, I believe that God's Spirit began to stir people. And we can talk about so many people: Zwingli, Jerome, Calvin, and many, many more. But the brightest light of the Reformation movement was a German priest known as Martin Luther. And he's not Martin Luther King, the civil rights person in America. But this man literally took his life in his hands by confronting the mighty Roman Empire. Do we have the screen? Okay. By confronting the mighty Roman Empire. At that point, he went and he wanted to have a discussion. Say, here are the things I do not agree with. I do not agree that somebody can buy forgiveness of sin. I do not agree that works can get you to heaven. I do not agree in the worship of Mary. I do not agree that a priest should not get married. I do not agree with all these things. So he nailed them in front of the church, seeking to have an audience. He was excommunicated eventually. And when you are excommunicated, you can't even enter the church auditorium. Now we call it auditorium, but at that point, the building had become the house of God. And Christians were no longer people that make up the church. It was a structure. And that was why so much money was spent in beautifying them and making them holy. Many artists were commissioned. People like Michelangelo, Rembrandt, Da Vinci, to draw even the Sistine Chapel. He painted, the Holy Chapel upside down. He was lying down on his back painting. By the time he had finished, it took a long time. He was seeing people upside down. And they usually don't get paid because the Roman Empire controlled everything. Of course, they lost Jerusalem. And in the bid to get back Jerusalem, they had to now get people to tell them, listen, you're going to go and fight for God. But the real truth was, it was all about land. Because he that controls land controls everything. But the Ottomans were already there. They gave them a fight for their money. And the brightest star at that point, is known as Saladin. If you are very good in history, you know about Saladin. Saladin was that Muslim guy who gave them a run for their money. And of course, they couldn't get Jerusalem. To encourage men to go and fight for the Pope, to fight for the papacy, they had to con them to believing that they were going to fight for God, they were doing God's bidding. Those were not usually religious men. They were mercenaries, soldiers for hire. If you look at their vestments, we see how replicas of their vestments today with a cross. And they were called the Crusaders. So today in Pentecostalism, when people say they're going for crusade, that's actually where they get people like that from. Crusade should be, let's go and fight for God. Let's go and demolish the kingdom of darkness. But in the real fact, they were actually fighting for money, for treasures. And of course, they did some unspeakable things. Women were raped, the temple was desecrated, Muslims were killed, and it was intense at that point. And up to today, whenever you talk about Christianity, an average Palestinian will ask you, what about the Crusades? They can't forget it. They say, what about what you did to us? It was genocide. And of course, in the dark ages, there was nobody that the Pope had gone to. The Pope was Lord, I was saying, as everything. So this young German guy was troubled as a priest. He was troubled in his heart because he couldn't agree. And he spoke to his superior and asked him, I keep having this feeling, I'm troubled, what do I do? Interestingly, the superior asked him to go and read the Bible. So you can imagine, a priest who doesn't read his Bible. And if you are here today and you don't read your Bible, you're also going to be troubled like that. He read the New Testament, and more than any other book in the Bible, the book of Romans inspired him. Especially a quotation that is found in the book of Habakkuk: the just shall live by their faith. So that became like a mantra for the Reformation movement at that time. The just shall live by their faith. It's not by the ordinances in the church. It's not by observing the Holy Eucharist. It's not by, it is by your faith. And it was a reaction because the Catholic Church had become so physical about the relics, the cross. You kiss the Pope's ring. The Pope became infallible. Pope Leo, declared that the Pope is just a representative here on earth, and in matters of religion and doctrine, he can never be wrong. That is called the infallibility of the Pope. So these men at that point, they reacted. So because he had been excommunicated from the church, he can't even attend the meeting. So people that were his sympathizers went, and when they went, the bishop did not show up. But there was a great argument, and all they were talking about was the scripture. Sola scriptura, the Bible only. Whatever the arguments when they would say the Bible only. So at the end of the day, they protested and they left. When the bishop came around and said, how did it go? They said these people, they protested and they left. And that gave back to the Protestant movement. So people that are called Protestants are just people who protest against the Catholic Church. I'm not a Protestant. If anything, I'm protesting against evil. So if you go to like a civil service environment, either in a school like Unilag, for example, or in army barrack, you usually find two structures related to the Christian faith. One is a Catholic, that one is a Protestant. So everyone who's a Catholic becomes a Protestant. That's very interesting, right? So these men began to fight for that. And of course, Martin Luther himself, he broke away. He got married to a nun, and but he had issues. Because the whole idea was to reform the Catholic Church. And the more you try to reform, the more you're going to see there's so much that you can do. So and in a way, the Reformation movement helped to just open our eyes and to confront the evil that was going on in the culture. Time will not permit us to look at all the various deeds that came out from that era, all the good deeds, and people like John Smith, who was the founder of the Baptist Church. Of course, Henry VIII, at that point founded the Anglican Church, not because he wanted to reform the Catholic Church, but because he wanted to have something that he wanted to have. He wanted to get married to a younger woman so that maybe he can have a male child, and he asked the bishop in England to nullify his wedding so he can marry another person, and the guy said no. So he literally kicked out the Catholic Church from England, and so they formed a new church known as Church of England, because the old one was called the Church of Rome, the Roman Catholic Church. It was just about 2 decades ago in Nigeria that began to scratch up the name Roman from the Catholic Church. I used to be a Catholic, baptized, confirmed, even by Archbishop himself. But you see, there's something about trying to reform. Because when you are reforming, you will reform things you like. Things you disagree with, and you leave the things that you like. In fact, Martin Luther King was so blown away. Taking out the king. Martin was so blown away when he read the book of James. When James talks about faith without work is dead. He was so disillusioned at that point that he actually proposed that they take the book of James out of the Bible. And that is what happens to us also. When you like something and you go after it, you are blinded to every other thing in it. The wisdom of history. So in trying to reform the Catholic Church, the world saw an emergence of so many denominations. The Methodists, the Baptists, and on. Now they are not called the Baptists because they are from John the Baptist. John was called John the Baptizer, but they were the Baptists because they said when the Catholic Church will sprinkle. Catholic Church actually started by immersion, then they went to pouring, then they went to sprinkling, and now it's probably just a thumb in the water on your head with the word the patriarch to status, and that's basically it. So guys said, well, let us baptize the way Jesus Christ said. So you were known as the Baptist. But there's a movement, that is more closer to us than the Baptist Church, and that is the movement that is known as the Anabaptist. These fiery men and women, eventually they were practically squashed, but they came out and said, you have to be baptized as an adult, and it has to be by immersion, and they stood their ground. To pay them back, religious groups will go to where they are baptizing people, and the person being baptized will be drowned. They will kill the person being baptized, and they also kill the person baptizing them. Many times, religious groups, the Christian denominations will come after them and they will behead them and kill them. So they were literally squashed. Now, you will never hear anybody say this an Anabaptist anymore. But it led to so many reformation. And just at that time, the printing press was invented, and of course now you can now read the Bible. The Bible can now be mass produced. In those days, the Bible were like as big as this, massive, and usually a town will have one Bible, and they usually chain it to the pulpit because it can be stolen. But right now, with the printing press, they can now print, the Bible in English, and men and women began not to read, and that was the fear of the Catholic Church. They say that knowledge is power. They also say that knowledge is only potential power. If you have knowledge, you are potentially powerful until you do something with the knowledge that you have. So people had the knowledge, only very few were willing to risk it because it was risky. You know, there are other denominations that came at that point. People now began to now have ideas, but they're not reading. People now began to say, you know what, we can predict when Christ will come back. Some of the very prominent speakers at that time for this idea was E.G. White, one, William Miller, two, and believe it or not, Cos Tess Russell, who eventually became the founder of the Watchtower Society. They came out as what they call the publishers of the kingdom. At that point, William Miller has predicted the end of the war several times, and each time he failed, his movement would scatter and they would regroup again. They kept scattering and regrouping, and he kept failing. Then E.G. White also came again and said, they can predict when the end of the war will come, and they failed also. One of the most popular books by E.G. White is A Great Controversy. I've had that book for about 25 years. It's a good book, but it is very controversial, and right now it has been republished under a new name, and that new name is Will America Survive? They have lots of ideas. Then Charles Tess Russell broke off and started up the Watchtower Society. So just at the peak at that time, in the early 1900s, for some reason, God began to stir the hearts of many people all over the world. People began to now rethink, what are we doing? For each time we try to reform the existing Catholic Church or the existing movement, what we're going to have, what we keep having is splitters. People were just breaking away and forming more groups and more groups and more groups. For some reason, men began to come out from churches where they belong, the Baptist Church, some for the Anglican Church, and most notably, the Presbyterian Church. Presbyterian Church, the word Presbyterian is presbyter, this is the elders. And they came together and said, you know what, let us just abolish all our creeds and let us become just Christians. What was it, level? They were called Christians. Let us become Christians. And you hear slogans like, we are Christians only, but not the only Christian. So they were a little bit exclusive, but they were also open to include other people who were thinking the same way that that they were. And of course, the three brightest stars of what we now known as the Restoration Movement, Martin Stone, Thomas and Alexander Campbell. That's the father and son. And he led to three movements at that point: the Christian Church, the Disciples of Christ, and of course the Church of Christ. We are close related to the Churches of Christ or the Church of Christ. And for many years they were the fastest growing movement churches, and in America, in Scotland, in some part of England also. Especially when Christopher Columbus discovered the new world, people were now moving over and people wanted to go and practice this new faith, but they were being persecuted. And that's what brought a lot of them to America. The church grew at that time. They were unified in a way. But as time went on, preference began to creep in. Preference on how we worship. Preference on who serves the communion. Preference, some of them, or even the part of scripture to believe or not to believe. Are we a New Testament church, an Old Testament church, or are we a Bible church? And for many years they did very well. But gradually, just like in everything in life, as old age steps in, there's always a tendency to want to begin to question your earlier convictions. It happened to many prophets in the Old Testament. It happened to even John the Baptist. The only person alive at that time, maybe the second person alive also, who had a reason to believe, who had at that point an evidence. There was a voice from heaven that said, "Behold, this is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased." John the Baptist knew that Jesus Christ was the Messiah. John the Baptist was the man that was going around preaching at everybody, laying everybody out, drawing the line for soldiers, for Pharisees, for Sadducees, for everybody, even the king. But when he went to jail, his spirit's conviction fell, And they began to ask, are you still the one? Or shall we? And there are lessons to learn. You know, Jesus is not just Lord when things are going well. He has to be Lord. And that is what Jesus wants to tell us to today. And many people have bought into it. That when bad things happen to you, God is not with you. I put up to believe it. Believe in the word of claim it, believe it and claim it. No weapon fashioned against me will prosper. Believe in a world where it's like if you're a Christian, you are immune to anything human. You are immune to poverty, to sickness, to failure in school. You are immune to accident, you are immune to anything. You see, when we preach that kind of Christianity, it is the same kind of Christianity that Constantine introduced, where if you want peace, come and be a Christian. So people will go to church for the wrong reasons. There was no more cost counting. And of course, this was the time of the Industrial Revolution. You know, market was booming. Machines or machineries were introduced and manufactured. There was a need for major, workforce in the urban setting. The children of Christ at that point was practically rural. And children were raised up by their parents. Mothers helped out in raising up. Fathers go to work. And children help them to work. And they train them at home because they wanted to protect them from the world. Even up to now, a lot of children of Christ still have to do homeschooling, where they only allow their children to go to school when they enter secondary school. So they train, but they don't want them to be influenced by the world. Even Nigeria here, some children of Christ still do it. You see, with the children now growing up and living home, who was going to take care of them? Just like we have now, where children, a very young age, some of them 12. I heard that some kids are entering university right now at 14. And I found out a joke because my daughter is 14. She's just in SS1. So who's going to take care of them? So in that became a responsibility of anywhere you go, let them take care of you. So parents were sending their children out. So they were coming to congregations in a town and they couldn't fit in. And that gave birth to groups to take care of these young people. Groups like, they didn't call them that same, but the teen ministry to take care. It was not just to infuse the children to the church, but trying to do the work of parents. Campus ministry. And many of those children lost their faith. Churches began to grow, denominations all over the place. There was war, civil war being fought. The gay rights was coming up, the hippie movement was coming up. People were rebelling. White people were rebelling, blacks were rebelling. Many African countries were fighting for independence at that time. Like Nigeria got ours 1960. There was struggle for identity. People wanted to know, who am I? Young men were growing their hair in US and other places as a sign of rebellion against this, the system. Because of not being accepted, there was now a movement of go back to Africa. The Rastafarian movement began at that time. And people in Jamaica, didn't just grow locks, but they grew dreadlock, very dreadful locks. And of course, Marcus Garvey was a man involved, and he claimed that the last emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, was God, was Jesus Christ. So it was a moment to go back to Africa. If I didn't give them a place in Ethiopia, come back to Africa. People in Africa was saying, we want to be free. So at that point, Church of Christ began to go down because you don't know how to take a stand anymore. Your kids will come back home with earrings, the boys, with stretch hair. The black guys are like, you don't accept us, we're going to be black. So no more stretching your hair, we're going to grow afro. And men, began to react. You brought us here in chains, we're going to wear chains. So you see people wearing gold chains. People were wearing oversized clothes because as a black person, before the black became free, things were passed down to you. And when you want to make a clothes, you don't make something like tights for fear of outgrowing it. So they make something bogus. So blacks were wearing, until today is still there. Oversized trousers, oversized shirts, people were sagging, all sorts were coming in. The church didn't know how to handle it. God moved And for some reason, a young minister, I'm going to show you two photographs here. The one in black and white, his name is Chuck Lucas. Chuck Lucas was a campus minister in the Military of Christ, and he wanted to find a way to engage young people. Unlike here in Nigeria, that schools are in session all year round. You know, in some of the world, the academic calendar has been synchronized. At one point, everybody's in school. In summer, everybody go home for 3 months or so, then they come back in September and on and on. You know, so what do we do? Here we are running campus ministries, and people are getting fired up, we're raising them up. For 3 months, boom, they all go, and most of them come back falling. They come back, of course, a lot of them have started, doing drugs. They were getting immoral. They were losing their faith. So these guys say, you know what? I won't just stop campus ministry during school hours. After school, I'll go to the beach and I'll go and preach. Where I have young people. And we began to preach. And just the people began to respond. And it was a movement that began in a campus ministry. In a church that was once called the Crossroad Church of Christ. And that movement began to grow. And what I did was to get the young people back. If the old people will not do it, let the young people back, let them find out, because we are losing them. We are losing them. And that sounds familiar. You have to look at history. Many people were converted in that church, including our brother Richard Lawaye was baptized in that church many years afterwards. You know, and their idea was to now send out campus ministers to other Church of Christ to help the youth, ministry there. But the older ones were staying, but the new ones were not being converted. And that's a lesson. Any animal that stops reproducing, or any animal that cannot reproduce as fast as it's dying, or faster than it's dying, will eventually become extinct. First, you're going to be endangered, because after a while, most of the animals will be old animals. And the same thing happened to our cocoa industry in Nigeria. In the early 60s, we made so much money from cocoa, and 70s also. We made so much money, we were building houses, cocoa house. Wow. The tallest one in West Africa. Right there in Ibadan. And there's so much history. Right there in Ibadan. It was the cradle of selection in Nigeria, kind of. The first university. We are having that the first radio station in Africa was right there in Ibadan. The first airline in Africa was right here in Nigeria, Nigeria Airways. Yeah. Everything was like starting here. There was so much hope. But interestingly, even now, just over 50 years afterwards, it will take you an average of 2 hours. 1.5 hours if you are driving like 2 hours to cross from Lagos to Ibadan. And yet, there is a gap. See what happened? Yes, it was like, they are so close. Even in Djibouti, we say so close. Something happened. People stopped growing. And the day you stop growing, that day, you start dying. So many young men were converted at that time. Very notable is the young man there, Thomas Wayne McCain, known as Skip McCain. He was converted at that point and discipled by a brother. Unfortunately, when he went back on holiday, he couldn't fit in anywhere. So he too became weak. He was sick, which, he gave him the scar he still has till today. And people had to encourage him to keep faith. Yeah. And he came back. So as the campus ministry was growing and they were send them out, many of our campus ministers were fired from churches where they went to go and lead. Because they found them too loud, they were too fired up for the older people, too optimistic, and they tend to want to have the same standard or expect standard from themselves from everybody in the church. And I know how that is. In my campus ministry, we go to church in the morning, we get home at night. Sunday is like, that's what we do. That's what we do. So now, I don't think it's fair to expect that from all of you guys. But you have kids. Go to church on Sunday, break our service in 2, we have light meal, fellowship break, meal, come back again, finish up the service, have communion, have sermon. They'll talk about our for like 2-3 hours. They'll hang around with video games. We chat till 6-7 o'clock. They'll start going. Now, can you believe what it will mean if I spend that stand up for you? And that's what we do every week. Standard. Some of us will struggle. Some of us will like it, but some of us will struggle. Now, so that now comes. So how much should we expect from everybody in the church? How much should we demand from everybody in the church? So many of those young ministers lost their jobs. And Kip also lost his job. Roger Lam also lost his job. Many of them lost their jobs. They were kicked out. But they were fortunate enough to be asked to come and work in a small church in Boston. Getting there, he was supposed to be the campus minister, and that's what they were doing. But they found out that it was weird to convert people from the campuses and get to a church that is lukewarm. So he, according to him, demanded that he has to also be the pulpit preacher. I'm going to do campus, I'm also going to do the service. Now, it is very controversial if you want to use the word will be disciples or not. But those men and women there dedicated their lives to living out the Bible every single day. Kip was just 24 years old. When you do something bad, you don't need anybody to tell somebody else because it will go. It's called news. When you do something good, you have to pay to get it out. It's called advertisement. But at that point, it was not like this definition. It was good. And then, because churches were weak at that point. People wanted to know, how can we get a church running again? Man, bro, you have your church full on Sunday? Middle times, everybody came to church. How did you do it? What did you do? How do you get all the young people to be fired up, to be evangelistic, to be shaking their faith? How do you do it? People wanted to know. And so, people began to come to learn. Now, there are various sides to this story. And like I said, history can be very subjective sometimes, especially from the point of the person saying it. At this time, I was still a disciple. I was still in primary school. I never knew I was going to be doing this. But that church saw some of the most phenomenal growth in modern day church history. Not just growth because of advertisement. Growth from one to one on one. It was fast. It was furious. I remember years ago, like 18 years ago, we were in a lorry, and Soji Fademi, I don't know if he's here. He had a professor. Actually, Soji was the only student in the class, the only student in his master's. So he normally does his lecture in the professor's office. And of course, you can't fail if you're the only student. And so we invited this professor to church. He came to church just once. And I fixed I was talking with him on the Monday. So we went on the Monday to his office. And the guy was telling me, I said, listen, he said, your church, it appears familiar. I said, oh, you are there? He said, I'm the first time. He said, are you related to one church like that in Boston? That's what he asked us. We said, yeah. What's your plan? He said, let me just ask one question. How do you guys get people to come all over the place and enter that place? Interestingly, he was doing his PhD in Harvard. And he was a member of this Baptist church. And himself and his friend were the only black people there. Because he was Baptist from home, so he attended the Baptist church. But after a while, the reverend found out that they were not really fitting in. One, they didn't want them to fit in. If you know Boston is very cold. Sort of people's whatever. Boston is weird. That was one place I've been to, and I felt weird because a sister came from US and gave us t-shirts, and he gave me this t-shirt that says Black Crew, and there was Obama there when Obama just became president. So here I was in US, and we went to church. We were going for Bible talk meeting, and the evangelist's son was playing soccer, and he said, okay, let's go. So I entered, I changed my clothes, wore this, I came and I said, are you wearing that? I said, sure, why? I think it's a good idea. I said, do you think I should take it off? He said, I'll probably do that if I will. I had to go back. I said, what is wrong with America? I had to go back and say, the white folks here don't like that because they are Republican. In fact, myself, Mr. George, and Mr. Sam, we lived in a Republican person's house. And I wore that same t-shirt. And when I went to go and see the Alawites, he asked me, Emmanuel, did you wear that t-shirt in Alice's house? I said, this guy is such a Republican. So you can imagine if we're not brothers, what's going to happen? So the church grew fast, and with growth, there's always so many things that were left behind, left undone. We're fast, we're furious. The whole idea was, was to go and help out Other Church of Christ. And initially, one brother was talking to me. So initially, there was no difference between them and Other Church of Christ. They need to go on dates together until something began to happen. The ideas Church of Christ were now evaluated. Many branches of Church of Christ, some of them are called the one cup Church of Christ. They believe because Jesus Christ said, "This is my cup." It is a cup. So communion must be served by only one cup. Some of them will say it is a sin to have a kitchen in the church or to serve food, and so many other things. And they held on to all those things. And they will say that to use instruments was a sin. Not just any kind of sin, was a grievous sin, like I take it to hell. And so we began to stop like, well, it's not that way. And their slogan was, where the Bible speaks, we speak. Where the Bible is silent, we are silent. And so our brothers idea were like, well, why can't it be where the Bible is silent, we speak? Where the Bible speaks, we are silent. Can't it be that way? And that gave us room to now investigate and find out that we can do so much more. But with that happening, because that became a rift between the Boston movement, as it was called, and what we now call the mainline church. I don't call them mainline church of Christ, we call them mainline church of Christ. A time came that our brother Sam Lane was struggling in his faith. He was the same brother encouraged Keith McCain when he was 24 years old to keep the faith. He was now struggling and he wanted to quit. And Keith flew down to encourage him. And after encouraging him, he said, "No, we're going to do something in your church." And he literally drew a line and told people, if you want to be part of the new Advantage of Christ, cross over the rest, go home. Now, am I going to do that today? Maybe not. Because I talk about the wisdom of history. There was no room to persuade. Because young people don't think twice. Yeah. Our campus ministry, we enter the bottom, after that, we don't have food to eat when we get here. But remember, 5 of them. Every night, we don't sleep until 3-4 o'clock. Every night, I'll go there, we are walking, preparing for ICOC, and I see them drinking that, they're from the same cup, and they drink tea from, they don't wash it, That's what they If you live in that, the boss is saying, let's trek, don't trek. So people were asked to go home, and that's actually sent a very wrong signal around the whole Church of Christ. We tried doing reconstruction. The first one was Kingston in Jamaica, where people will invite us to come and help us. And what will happen at that time, they will take the minister to Boston or to wherever there's a Boston movement church and bring a new minister, and the guy will carry us, everybody. Question: was there anything wrong with that? The guy speaking, no. Would it have been done differently and better? Yes. And of course, there's something that happens when you grow. Thank you very much. I guess my time is running out. Okay. There's something that happens when you grow, or when you are rich, or when you are blessed, or when things are going well for you, just like the church in Laodicea. I'm rich, I don't need anything. Listen, the campus student today will take anything from you. You say, "Bro, are you hungry?" You're hungry. Yeah. "Oh, bro, you want to eat?" You want to, I want to. But some of you, because you have money to go and eat, you probably say, "I don't want." So when you are rich, you are whatever, you probably will not want to do some things. You become very comfortable. And that's what's happening at that time. The church grew fast from 30 to 800 to 1,000. Mission teams were being sent around in America. Then before you know it, to France, then everywhere. And we declared what I believe was one of the most ambitious evangelistic idea in the 21st century, to evangelize the world, every country with the population of 100,000 in one generation. I would accept a 6-year plan. I was part of the 6-year plan. Many of us were part of the 6-year plan. It was serious. Ideas like the one suitcase challenge. Everything you have must fit into a suitcase if you are going to go on a mission field. The idea of where you live, where you work, go anywhere, do anything, give up everything. Now, was anything wrong with that? No. How was that we spread ourselves too thin? It's like taking a scoop of butter to want to butter a loaf of bread. After a while, you won't see the butter anymore. So we spread ourselves too thin and we stretch Stretching. Some of churches that were planted at that period didn't survive. And many of them are still hurting at that time. Many brothers began to evaluate how we're doing what we're doing. At that point, because of our unorthodox methods, we have caught the wrong attention. We are being persecuted everywhere. We are hated. We made the media, from Newsweek to CNN to 2020 to any news magazine that you can think of that is interested in hearing a controversy. People call us names. I remember one time evangelizing, and I met a young guy. I mean, you can't tell I'm a pastor of the church. You can't tell who it is. Especially with all this stuff. So I said, which church? I said, why? He said, oh, my pastor said that your pastor flies at night. And I hear about the pastor. I said, if I can fly, then I don't need a car. 2 weeks ago, we baptized a young guy, a sharp young guy on the islands. And the day he was that very night, he got a call from his pastor. And the pastor asked him, I hope he didn't baptize you in blood. The biggest persecution he's facing right now is from his wife, who has gone on the internet to go and download negative publicity about the church. And they are there on the internet. Many of them are false. Some are half-truths. And many people who have let go to those people who some of them have been discouraged from the church for sin, because they can't have their way, so they want to destroy the church. But that is the test. The test of who we are and what can happen to us. So many brothers began to write and to say, you know what, we need to slow down. By the time we were done with the magisterial proclamation that was signed, our churches were hurting. And I'm going to lead us, but at that time, we were more interested in baptizing than retaining. Now we retain a lot, like all of us here, including myself. But if you keep having children, boom, 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 it's hard to take care of them. And your children should grow. Each time people say, oh, why do your kids? And it's so tall. I said, well, it's a bit dry. And can you imagine if Henry keeps growing? Or his arm just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. That is called disease. And sometimes we start to recognize the disease because of what we want to achieve for ourselves. So I believe, with all my heart, that the evaluation that we faced was from God. In the book of Hebrews 12, verse 4, in your struggle against sin, you have yet to resist to the point of shedding your blood, and you have forgotten that word of encouragement that addresses you as son. My son, do not make light the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines those who he loves, and he punishes everyone he accepts as son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone that goes disciplined, then you are illegitimate children and not true sons. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirit and live? Our father disciplined us for a little while, as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it brings a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. So, what is the lesson of history? What should we learn? Where are we now? Well, for many things, in 2003, we were evaluated, and I like to use that word evaluation. It was not crisis, but not everyone was in crisis. It was an evaluation, and God was not expecting to be evaluated. It's like on campus, students hate examination as if it was invented to kill them. From the day you enter school, you will be examined. So God brought up a time where we have to examine what we're doing. Some of us were harsh, some of us were not sensitive. People were hurt, even as we were trying to do good. Many good was done. People got saved all over the world. Barriers were broken. Religious, bigotry was taken away. Even amongst our church, For many years, people like, how do you get your church to marry from across ethnic groups? So we don't know. You know, and it was going very well. Teenagers were growing up to become disciples, you know, from the world. Was it a downside to learning the mistakes of the past? Is that sometimes we think it will not happen again. That's what we think it will happen again. And we quickly want to move on. Today I asked us, what have we thrown away with the bad water? What are those things that we have thrown away? There were most things were good. Some things were just human. People couldn't handle authority. What are the lessons? How did we come? We came from a vibrant group. As church leaders today, I charge you. How is your campus ministry and team ministry doing? You see, as your church ages, you're going to see more of people, which is natural. But where could that? There's going to flood the fire again. Are you endangered as a church? Or as a congregation, are you endangered? When our children grow up, when they were born, we put so much emphasis in raising them up. From 0 to 1 or 2 to 3 and on to preaching. We celebrate their going to preaching. We celebrate that they are entering team ministry. And shortly before they enter university, we take them and throw them away. Many children today, we can't even account for them. They go to schools, we don't even know where they are. And I spoke to church leaders, a lot of you have got to my phone call, week in, week out. Where are your teenagers? Regional leaders have got to some of them on phone for 1 hour. What is happening in your ministry? Don't you know that if you don't harvest those children back, you don't have anything to plant back? You don't have anything. One wise man once said that every movement of man goes through 4 ends. There is a man, and believe you me, you are the man. The man will have a message, and that man will take the message and determine to spread the message and you gather momentum, the 3rd M. Finally, the 4th M is not a decision you have to make. And that shows that the man, the message, the momentum we've gathered, are we going to settle to become a monument, or are we going to go back to being a movement again? Why have we stopped growing? Why have you stopped growing? Why is baptism scarce? Why do you have those people falling away? Why are we coming to church of old people? Where are children? The wisdom of history. Number 1 lesson: people don't learn from history. Today, are you going to learn? Some of you are here, you don't know where your kids are. Your kids are not to school. In the next 5 days or so, we're going to have the ICOC. Today, I just got a call today, 2 calls actually. One was from Abidjan. We were like, man, we are coming. We're going to go to Togo and gather people to Togo and come over. And I got an email. Gilbert said, they've got a visa. Where? From Kinshasa, Congo. And yet, some of you cannot promise you to come to campus. Listen, I can do this for 3 hours. I'm a product of the campus ministry, and we are still here. It's not a gray hair. It is zeal for the house of God. What kind of church do you want to have the next 10 years? What church do you want to have? Whatever your answer is, start living it right now. God bless you.